Welcome back and welcome to your NEA session on data analysis. So at this stage, you have completed your introduction, where you've outlined exactly what you are going to investigate and the context to it. And you've also completed your methodology, which outlines the methods you are going to use to obtain the data you need to answer the key questions you set in the first place. Now, to answer those key questions using that data, the data analysis is the most important section. Here, you get the chance to outline exactly what the data says that you collected. You get to outline how it links to theories, and you get to critically analyze what it says. So, first thing is a brief checklist for you of the things you should be doing in a data analysis for an NEA. Now, the word count here, again, this is very rough. It's not a limit. It can be as long as it needs to be, but it should be roughly 1,200 words. So in your data analysis, you should have each of your sub-questions or hypotheses addressed, and you can use those as titles in your data analysis. All of your work should be paragraphed, and it should describe, explain, and critically analyze the data you've gathered. It should have, depending on the investigation, some sort of statistical testing involved. So you might have a Spearman's rank calculation, or a Mann-Whitney test, or a t-test, or a chi-squared test, or mean, median, mode, or interquartile range. It should also have embedded and formatted data presentation techniques. So in the last section, you will have already completed your data presentations. And this is the chance where you now bring them into the data analysis. So you move them into your data analysis document and you put them in where you talk about them throughout your data analysis. You link all of your analysis to theory if you can. So if there are any theory which proves or disproves or that you can link to, please do include that. That might be in your introduction from earlier. You try and link the data sets together. So for example, if you've done an environmental quality survey and a house price survey, you may find that there is a link between those two things, in that the house prices are higher in the places where EQS is higher, for example. And finally, you should have brief conclusions at the end of each of your sections in your data analysis. So if you've written all about key question 1, at the end of your analysis of key question 1 and that data, you should have a brief conclusion which overall says what you found out from that key question and from that data. So let's just go through some of the things you will find in a data analysis. First of all, structuring your data analysis. And I've already mentioned this. Use each key question or sub-question or hypothesis as titles for your sections in your data analysis. Follow a clear structure. So give a brief description of the results. Interpret and explain what they tell you. Try and compare or contrast them, or find links and anomalies or trends, and then briefly overall conclude as to what the results say. Embed the presentation of your data into your data analysis and make sure you can easily refer to them. Give them all a figure name or a table name. For example, figure 12 above shows. And finally, as I said earlier, link to theory where possible. This is what separates candidates being level 3 and level 4. So, in terms of statistical tests, there are plentiful out there you could use. They're also not compulsory, but are recommended, especially if you have an abundance of data and are trying to demonstrate differences and similarities between, for example, different locations or streets. So I've picked out 5 of the main statistical tests, which are level 4 skills that you could use. So Spearman's rank. Now, Spearman's rank is used to test the correlation or non-correlation between sets of numerical data. Mann-Whitney U tests the significance of the difference between the median of 2 sets of data. Standard deviation tests the variation in a set of data away from the mean. And that shows whether the spread of data is wide-ranging and broad or narrow-ranging. A t-test is a test that test basically the mean of two sets of data to show if there is a significant difference between both of the means of those two sets of data. And finally, chi-squared test. This checks the association between data sets, and it's only really used in data that has an occurrence, so every so often, or has a frequency. Now, that's just a brief roundup of some of the statistical tests you could use and what you could use them for. But please do check out the links at the bottom of the screen there on the PowerPoint available to you. Both of those links go through all of the types of statistical tests you could use and shows you how to use them. And please don't forget that the RGS NEA guide is also available to you. And that has about 30 pages or so on how to carry out statistical tests and where they are appropriate. So next, we're going to go through just some brief examples of extracts taken from previous year's NEAs. So this one is an example of essentially looking at house price data in relation to gentrification. So this student here is looking at Spitalfields and Bangortown in London, and they're looking at the improvement in house quality and house price. And you can see what this student does is starts off by going through the evidence of gentrification and change that has taken place in the area, and then starts to talk about the data that she has or he has collected. Now, this is secondary data from Zoopla, and it is looking at average house prices, and she is or he is comparing them to England's house prices overall and other wards within London. You can also see then that the student at the bottom of the second paragraph has given a bit of an indication that this method might not be so reliable because they are estimates of house price rather than actual house price, and so it defaults to the average. You can then see that this student has actually represented the secondary data using what's called a proportional symbol cartograph. The bigger the house on the map, the higher the price. And the student has used a key to show that as well. So this is a nice visual way of representing secondary data using proportional symbols, and it is therefore clearly, easily analysed and linked to their key question. The student finally picks out the clear trends from their data presentation and also from the data they've collected to show that they understand the changes that are taking place and they critique that data as well. So that's one example of how you could answer a key question as part of your analysis. Second example, the student is looking at Spitalfields and Bangortown again, but this time is looking at gentrified areas in particular, where housing quality and value is higher, and they are testing the environmental quality score in relation to that. So the environmental quality score is tested in the wards that the student has gone to. The student then picks out where the highest environmental quality scores were found and where the lowest environmental quality scores are found. And you can see the student also gives possible reasons for those high and low scores. General building quality, roads and pavements, graffiti, tourism, and so on. The student also reflects on the day that they were in the area and on the field, reflecting on the traffic amount, public parks, etc. The student then uses a scatter graph to represent the relationship between housing and also environmental quality. And so the student is able to pick out from that scatter graph that there is a negative correlation between housing and environmental survey in her or his investigation. The student then just uses some of the scores on the scatter graph to prove that that non-correlation or negative correlation exists. So again, this is an example of how a student has linked house prices to EQS and gentrification, explains the possible impacts of the EQ scores, and also uses a scatter graph really well to link it to the data. And the final example here for you is the third key question that this student carried out. looking at the changes in socioeconomic groups in wealth and reducing poverty. So this is a really good example of how you can use secondary data as well. This student has linked gentrification to housing quality and also to a higher EQS as well. And this student says, as a result of those linked pieces of data that they have carried out, it could be said that the ward is becoming less deprived. And then the student uses secondary data as theory. The changes between 2001 and 2011 in the census to show how housing has dropped in overcrowding, how housing with central heating has improved, how lone parent dependent with children has improved, and also how owner-occupied housing has changed. Now that's really a very good skill to be able to do because you are linking it directly to secondary data that is verified, and you are showing that what you found out in your investigation is actually supported by something secondary. However, and you can actually see on the right-hand side, the student starts the next paragraph with, however, poverty remains a problem. The student says that the index of multiple deprivation for 2015 says that this is one of the most deprived wards in the UK. The student also then researches from LSOA Atlas there at 2012 some data that shows population density, child poverty, out of work people, free school meals, etc., to show that there are other indicators you can look at that show poverty is still a major problem in this area. So the student links all of the things together really well, uses ONS and ward profile data very well, and critiques the gentrification that took place in not improving people's poverty overall in some ways. So there are 3 examples of how you can carry out a data analysis and some of the things you might do within that data analysis. Finally, remember, it's very important with every section that you keep your referencing up to date. So anything you refer to, any secondary data you use, any quotes you use, please make sure that you use Neil's Toolbox as a referencing tool to create your references and keep a list of those references at the end of your document. That is everything I have for you on data analysis. Remember, keep using peeled paragraphs, keep them as detailed as possible, and keep using the data as much as possible. I hope you found that useful, and good luck with your analysis writing.